I felt the bracelet snap before I even saw it hit the table. My $15,000 bracelet, my mother's, my inheritance, my pride, lay in shattered pieces. My nephew froze wide-eyed, while my sister laughed, a light, dismissive sound that made my blood boil. "It's just a bracelet," she said, waving her hand as if I had imagined the pain. Laughter erupted around the table, cutting deeper than any words could. I stood frozen, heat rising to my face, hands trembling. Everyone was watching, amused by my shock. My husband shifted uncomfortably, eyes down, doing nothing. I wanted to scream, to throw the remnants of the bracelet at them, to make them feel even a fraction of the betrayal I felt. Instead, I clenched my fists under the table, forcing myself to breathe. The humiliation sank into my bones. My name is Lois Hartman, and in that instant, I realized my family had never really seen me. They had taken my patience, my care, and my contributions for granted. Tonight they had crossed a line. Every laugh was a challenge. Every glance dismissed me. And I decided in that moment that I would not let it go. I would respond, but on my terms, carefully, deliberately, and with a patience they could not imagine. Hi, if you are enjoying this story, please like and subscribe to this channel. Go ahead to click on the notification button to catch up on more stories. I left the dinner quietly, stepping out onto the crisp night air. The streetlights cast long shadows across the sidewalk, and I gripped my purse as if holding on to control itself. Inside, laughter echoed through the open windows, mocking me. I wanted to turn around, to shout, to demand respect, but I knew rage in the moment would be my enemy. I drove home slowly, the world outside a blur, replaying every detail. The way my sister's lips had curved in amusement, the smirk on my husband's face as if to say, "It's not worth it." I parked in my driveway, staring at the reflection in the car window. What had I done to deserve this kind of disrespect? It wasn't just about the bracelet. It was about the way they minimized me, laughed at my feelings, and ignored the sacrifices I had made for this family. I thought about my nephew, innocent yet careless, and wondered how many lessons he would learn under my watch. That night I made a decision. I would respond, not with anger but with strategy. I would reclaim respect not just for myself, but to show my family that their arrogance had limits. Their laughter would not go unanswered. I would be patient, careful, and deliberate. The first step would be subtle, invisible, yet powerful. The next morning I started planning. Every word spoken at the dinner, every laugh, every dismissive glance, replayed in my mind. I made a list of the family dynamics. My sister's arrogance, my husband's passive avoidance, my nephew's dependence on my generosity. Each became a potential leverage point. My eyes fell on the football academy subscription I had been funding for my nephew. A small smile touched my lips. I didn't want to punish him cruelly. He was a child, but the subscription was a tangible representation of my influence, and my family would feel it immediately. I called the academy and paused the payments for the upcoming term. There was no announcement, no dramatic confrontation. Just a quiet shift that would ripple through the household. Later, I watched my nephew's face when he learned about it. Shock, confusion, disappointment, but also respect, in the quiet way children learn lessons. I realized in that moment that my patience and subtlety were tools. I didn't need to shout to be powerful. Every ripple, every quiet adjustment, would accumulate until the family understood that ignoring and dismissing me had consequences. And most importantly, I would do it without malice, only fairness. Days passed, and I observed my family with a careful eye. At breakfast, my sister bragged about hosting an upcoming neighborhood gathering. I smiled politely but noticed how she overlooked details, overestimated her influence, and underestimated my presence. My husband, normally neutral, glanced at me with an expression I couldn't read. I realized that each event, each interaction, was an opportunity to demonstrate competence, patience, and subtle authority. One evening, while walking my dog in the park near our neighborhood, I overheard neighbors gossiping about my sister's latest small disaster. I said nothing, simply nodded and walked on, letting them draw their own conclusions. The power of observation became my quiet weapon. Each minor error, each misstep, became a subtle leverage for later. I began noting times, dates, and reactions, cataloging them in a mental ledger. The family believed they were in control, laughing at my silence, yet they had no idea that every laugh was fueling my strategic plan. I would wait for the perfect moments, the ones that would yield maximum impact, without crossing ethical boundaries. My patience, I realized, was as much strength as any action. 2 weeks after the incident, I implemented the first subtle shock. At breakfast, I casually mentioned that the football academy payments had been paused, framed as a concern for proper scheduling and growth. My nephew froze, wide-eyed. My sister's eyes narrowed, her mouth twitching as if she were about to argue, but I remained calm. The household tension thickened immediately. My husband avoided eye contact, shifting nervously. I let the silence linger, smiling gently, watching as the ripple spread. No yelling, no accusation, just a small, controlled adjustment that highlighted my influence. I realized the family's arrogance made them underestimate small actions. They expected loud responses, emotional outbursts, but subtlety had a far greater effect. Each day I began creating opportunities like this, small, ethical interventions that forced them to acknowledge me indirectly. They didn't see me as a threat yet, but cracks were forming. The first wave of respect, quiet and grudging, began to emerge, and I felt a small thrill. My patience was paying off. I wasn't just reacting, I was shaping outcomes. Every dinner, every family gathering, every casual comment became a calculated move in a game they didn't even know they were playing. One Saturday, I attended a neighborhood bake sale with my nephew. My sister, of course, was there, showing off her latest perfect cupcakes, while ignoring the children's involvement. I watched quietly as she micromanaged everyone, her arrogance obvious. I joined the children in decorating, guiding them carefully, encouraging their creativity. Soon, neighbors began noticing my influence. Compliments trickled in quietly, and I saw subtle envy cross my sister's face. She attempted a sarcastic comment about my helpfulness, but I simply smiled and continued. The power of perception, I realized, could be as strong as any confrontation. Even small, indirect influence could shift opinions and control. By the time we left, I had quietly reshaped how others viewed the family dynamics. My sister's smugness had softened into discomfort. And while my nephew learned the value of responsibility and teamwork, I learned that patience, observation, and subtle action could achieve far more than anger. My strategy was working, and I began to see the long arc forming, the slow, inevitable shift of power back toward me, without malice, only measured influence. Back at home, I began documenting everything. Minor errors my sister had made, her dismissive comments, her failure to notice my contributions, all catalogued quietly. I realized that if I ever needed to confront her or the family, I could do it with undeniable precision. Knowledge was power, and I collected it with care. One evening, my husband asked innocently why I seemed more focused, more deliberate. I smiled and said, "Just noticing patterns." He didn't press, but I could tell he sensed a change in me. My patience, my calm observation, and my strategic mind were slowly reshaping the family landscape. I had moved from powerless humiliation to quiet authority, unseen yet undeniable. The subtlety of my plan ensured that no one suspected retaliation. They only saw a woman calmly taking control. I knew the family's arrogance would lead them into missteps. They believed in loud power, emotional outbursts, and drama. I had none of that. What I had was precision, patience, and a growing respect that they had yet to acknowledge. At a weekend barbecue, my sister tried to belittle me publicly, making a joke about my obsession with details. I laughed softly, almost to myself, and replied with calm facts about the event's preparation and organization. Her smile faltered, replaced by a thin line of irritation. My husband's eyes met mine briefly, a flicker of approval passing silently between us. My nephew, confused by the tension, looked to me for guidance. I gave him a nod, and he quietly followed instructions without complaint. By the end of the afternoon, neighbors had seen a clear contrast: my calm efficiency versus my sister's thinly veiled arrogance. I realized small, ethical demonstrations of competence could humiliate indirectly, without cruelty. This became my method. No shouting, no drama, just undeniable authority that contrasted sharply with my sister's performative confidence. By the time we left, the subtle shift in perception was palpable. I could sense my sister questioning herself for the first time in years. A week later, I went to my nephew's parent-teacher conference, the crisp autumn air sharp in my lungs. My sister, of course, insisted on tagging along, striding in as if she owned the room. She chatted loudly with other parents, clearly aiming to overshadow me. I stayed calm, taking notes, observing the room with practiced focus. When the teacher began discussing my nephew's progress, I asked precise, thoughtful questions, pointing out areas where I had noticed improvement at home. The teacher responded, impressed by my insights, praising the strategies I had quietly implemented. I felt a small thrill of satisfaction as my sister's smile faltered, her usual smugness replaced by the faintest flicker of irritation. My husband, sitting beside me, glanced briefly in my direction, his expression unreadable but his eyes holding a hint of respect. I watched my nephew carefully, seeing how his eyes followed my gestures and advice, and I realized that even he had begun to notice the subtle authority I wielded. It wasn't loud, it wasn't dramatic, but it was undeniable. My sister had always assumed she controlled perception, but patience, observation, and careful influence could quietly shift the balance. By the time we left, I had a clear sense of momentum building, and for the first time, I felt the early satisfaction of a long, carefully laid plan beginning to bear fruit. The family dynamics were slowly changing, and I could feel the power shift subtly in my favor. The following Saturday, the neighborhood fair offered the perfect stage for subtle influence. My sister was already there, loudly managing games and prizes, her voice dripping with performative confidence. I held my nephew's hand, leading him toward the craft tent, deliberately ignoring her theatrics. Inside, we quietly guided the children in creating decorations, offering encouragement without fanfare. I could hear neighbors whispering as they watched, noticing my calm, measured approach. "She's very patient," one mother murmured. "And organized," added another. I kept my focus on the children, my own satisfaction quiet but immense. My sister's forced smile faltered as she realized that the attention she expected to dominate was now subtly shifting toward me. My husband's gaze met mine briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. He had begun to see the contrast, her flashy arrogance versus my steady guidance. My nephew responded immediately, following my instructions without argument. Small successes like this were planting seeds, subtly demonstrating that competence, patience, and ethical influence carried weight. By the time we left the fair, I could feel a subtle but undeniable change in the family dynamic. My sister's smug confidence had been replaced by quiet irritation. Each small, measured action, each moment of guidance and recognition, was shaping the environment for the eventual reckoning. Patience and ethical strategy were proving more powerful than confrontation, and I could sense the long game gaining momentum. I began documenting everything meticulously, taking mental notes during each family interaction, public gathering, and neighborhood event. Every dismissive comment, every sarcastic laugh, every small misstep my sister made, was catalogued carefully. Knowledge had become my quiet weapon. One evening, I participated in a neighborhood volunteer project, taking charge of organizing tables and delegating tasks efficiently. My sister arrived mid-project, attempting to assert dominance, but volunteers naturally gravitated toward me. Her irritation was almost comical, though I did not react. I smiled politely, guiding the work with calm authority. Observing her floundering while I executed everything seamlessly was satisfying in a quiet, controlled way. My husband watched closely, his gaze filled with subtle approval. I realized that patience, observation, and ethical influence were far more effective than anger or loud confrontation. The subtle accumulation of respect from neighbors, friends, and even my nephew reinforced my growing influence. Each small victory, though invisible to my sister, was a brick in the wall I was building. I had transitioned from powerless humiliation to quiet, undeniable authority, unseen but clear. Every minor oversight my sister made became an opportunity to demonstrate competence, without malice, without dramatics, and every successful interaction increased the pressure on her, slowly eroding her assumed control. The stage was being set for a long, inevitable shift in family dynamics. A family brunch offered another opportunity to assert subtle influence. My sister tried to belittle me publicly, making a sarcastic remark about my perfectionism in organizing the table. I responded calmly, explaining the placement, timing, and coordination I had implemented, emphasizing efficiency without attacking her personally. Her face twitched as her planned insult collapsed under the weight of calm facts. My husband gave me a small, approving nod, confirming that my quiet authority was being noticed. My nephew looked to me for guidance, and I smiled, encouraging his attentiveness and respect. Throughout the brunch, I remained poised, watching my sister struggle to maintain her usual confidence while observers quietly acknowledged my competence. Each compliment, though subtle and often whispered, chipped away at her assumed dominance. The long, patient buildup of subtle victories was producing tangible effects. I felt satisfaction, not from humiliation, but from seeing fairness and competence recognized. Each family gathering became a calculated move in the larger strategy one had set in motion. By remaining ethical, calm, and strategic, I had begun dismantling the false authority my sister had taken for granted. Every small, public acknowledgement of my influence shifted the power balance, and I knew that patience would eventually produce the final reckoning. I felt a sense of anticipation, knowing the family's arrogance could only be challenged by deliberate, methodical action, and that the moment was approaching. 2 weeks later, I walked my nephew to the neighborhood soccer match. My sister was already there, her voice booming as she attempted to dominate the sidelines. I ignored her theatrics, guiding my nephew quietly, giving him calm, precise advice. The coach noticed and nodded approvingly, commenting on how disciplined and attentive my nephew had become. I smiled faintly, inwardly savoring the subtle acknowledgement. My sister's forced smile faltered, her irritation visible in the tight line of her lips. Parents began to glance at me, whispers of admiration floating across the field. My husband, standing a few steps behind, caught my eye and nodded ever so slightly. My nephew followed my instructions with focused attention, clearly learning from my example. Each of these small victories reinforced the slow but steady shift in authority. My sister had always assumed that loudness equaled power, that attention equaled respect. Now she was learning that competence, patience, and quiet influence held far greater weight. The shift wasn't dramatic yet, but it was undeniable. I could feel the momentum building, a quiet satisfaction that my long-term plan was taking effect. Every misstep she made, every compliment quietly whispered my way, was a brick in the foundation of my eventual triumph. And deep inside, I knew that the stage was being set for the final reckoning. This was just the beginning of the transformation. At a neighborhood fundraiser, I witnessed my sister attempting to assert her supposed generosity. She strutted about, announcing donations she had barely organized, her voice dripping with pride. I quietly assisted behind the scenes, ensuring that every detail ran smoothly, from tables to ticket sales. Observers began to notice the contrast, whispering about my calm and competent guidance. My sister's forced smile twitched, her irritation subtle but obvious. My husband watched from the sidelines, eyes flicking to me with a quiet approval I hadn't seen before. Even my nephew seemed to recognize the difference, following my guidance without hesitation. It wasn't a dramatic display, no one shouted or confronted anyone, but the impact was immediate. Small, ethical demonstrations of skill and patience spoke louder than arrogance ever could. By the time the fundraiser ended, neighbors had formed a clear perception of who truly ran things effectively. My sister tried to interject, but her words fell flat against the calm authority I had demonstrated. Each small victory like this, invisible to her at first, chipped away at her assumed dominance. I realized that influence gained through quiet competence had far more power than loud confrontation. The stage was being set for the final confrontation. And in my mind, I could already picture the precise moment when everything would come together, forcing my sister and husband to recognize the respect and authority I had quietly reclaimed. During a casual family dinner, I noticed my sister subtly attempting to redirect attention away from my contributions. Her sarcasm was thinly veiled, aimed at undermining my influence. I smiled politely and redirected the conversation, calmly highlighting my role in organizing a recent neighborhood event. Family members listened, nodding quietly, and I could see her irritation growing with every acknowledgement I received. My husband glanced at me, a flicker of approval in his eyes. My nephew watched attentively, absorbing the lesson that calm competence could wield far more authority than loud displays. Each interaction was reinforcing my position in subtle, undeniable ways. I realized that the slow, patient accumulation of respect was far more effective than dramatic confrontation. My sister's assumed power was beginning to crumble, though she still hadn't fully recognized it. By maintaining composure, guiding the conversation, and demonstrating competence, I was quietly reshaping the family dynamic. Each day, every minor acknowledgement from neighbors or family strengthened the momentum of my strategy. This long-term approach required patience, observation, and ethical influence, but the results were undeniable. I could feel the shift, subtle but unmistakable, and I knew that the final reckoning was approaching. I had laid the groundwork for a dramatic reversal of power, one that would demonstrate the value of respect, patience, and quiet authority. Soon they would have no choice but to recognize the impact of every careful, calculated step I had taken. The garden club meeting was another battlefield. My sister arrived, attempting to dominate every task, her voice rising above the hum of conversation. I remained calm, offering practical suggestions quietly, ensuring that projects ran smoothly. Volunteers began following my guidance, seemingly unaware of the subtle shift in authority taking place. My sister's irritation became more apparent as her instructions went ignored or subtly corrected. My husband observed quietly, and I noticed a small nod, a sign of his growing recognition of my influence. My nephew helped me demonstrate techniques to the younger children, reinforcing the lesson that calm guidance held power. Each successful demonstration, each acknowledgement, chipped away at my sister's assumed dominance. Observers whispered compliments, admiring my patience and effective leadership. I realized the long game was paying off. While my sister had relied on showy, performative confidence, I had built a foundation of genuine respect. By remaining ethical, composed, and strategic, I was slowly but surely shifting the family dynamic. My patience was becoming a weapon more potent than any argument or display of anger could ever be. I felt the momentum building toward the inevitable climax, the moment when my authority, earned quietly but undeniably, would force acknowledgement from every member of my family. Every subtle victory added weight to that impending reckoning. The weekend game night was my next opportunity. My sister immediately tried to dominate, loudly explaining rules, her voice bouncing off the walls. I remained calm, guiding the children, including my nephew, quietly and efficiently. Family members noticed the difference. My husband watched, a slight approving smile tugging at his lips. My sister's arrogance faltered, and I saw the subtle tightening of her jaw. Each child followed my instructions without complaint. I answered questions patiently, never condescending, making the process smooth and enjoyable. Small victories accumulated in quiet acknowledgement, each one eroding her assumed control. My sister tried to interject, but no one followed her lead. By the end of the evening, whispers of admiration for my calm authority floated around the room. My nephew smiled, sensing a newfound balance in the household dynamic. I realized that patience and ethical influence were more powerful than confrontation or dramatic displays. The slow, deliberate buildup of respect was working exactly as I planned. My sister's confidence was cracking, and I could feel the stage being set for the ultimate reckoning. The family was beginning to see a new truth. My calm, steady authority carried more weight than her flashy arrogance ever had. I left the evening with quiet satisfaction, knowing the final act was approaching. During the neighborhood art fair, my sister made another attempt to assert dominance, critiquing my attention to detail in front of everyone. I calmly countered, pointing out practical improvements I had suggested earlier, highlighting efficiency without belittling anyone. Observers whispered, noticing the contrast between her arrogance and my measured authority. My husband's approving glance did not go unnoticed. My nephew stood beside me, quietly absorbing the difference in approaches. Each compliment, though whispered, subtly strengthened my position. My sister's forced smile faltered repeatedly, revealing her growing frustration. Every small misstep became an opportunity to demonstrate competence ethically. I realized that influence gained through quiet authority was far more powerful than confrontation. Volunteers began following my guidance over hers, and even casual onlookers nodded in silent approval. By the end of the fair, the shift in perception was undeniable. My sister's assumed superiority had been chipped away, replaced by recognition of my reliability and leadership. Each subtle, strategic move I made built momentum, preparing the ground for the final confrontation. I felt the culmination approaching, like a storm gathering quietly on the horizon. Patience and ethical influence were shaping the family's acknowledgement of authority. The final reckoning was near, and every small victory I accumulated pushed my sister and husband closer to the moment when they would have to recognize the truth I had established. At the school fundraising event, my sister tried to display her organizational skills in front of parents and teachers. Loud and performative, she took charge of tasks without understanding the process. I quietly stepped in, guiding volunteers efficiently, ensuring everything ran smoothly. Compliments began to trickle in, whispered acknowledgments of my calm and effective leadership. Parents nodded, children followed instructions easily, and my nephew mirrored my composure. My sister's irritation was visible, thinly masked by her polite expressions. My husband's glance conveyed recognition and quiet approval. Each small victory reinforced the slow erosion of her assumed authority. My nephew looked at me with admiration, clearly absorbing the lesson that patience and competence outshone loudness and arrogance. Every misstep she made became an opportunity to demonstrate ethical influence, slowly shifting perception. Observers couldn't help but notice the contrast. My calm, structured approach versus her chaotic attempts at control. I realized that subtle, consistent demonstrations of skill were far more effective than confrontation. By the end of the event, it was clear. My influence was undeniable. My sister's assumed dominance had begun to crumble. The momentum I had been building over weeks had now created a visible shift in family dynamics. I knew the final reckoning was approaching, and I could feel the excitement of the long game nearing its climax. The balance of authority was finally tipping in my favor, and the stage was nearly set for the ultimate resolution. The neighborhood volunteer day tested my patience and strategy. My sister attempted to dominate every task, barking instructions and drawing attention to herself. I calmly guided volunteers, providing clear and ethical leadership, ensuring every activity ran smoothly. Observers whispered about my calm efficiency, admiration growing steadily. My sister's irritation deepened with every acknowledgement I received. My husband, standing a few steps back, offered a subtle nod of approval. My nephew assisted me quietly, following instructions and observing my composed authority. Each successful interaction chipped away at my sister's assumed dominance, and her forced smiles became more strained. The shift in perception was tangible. Those around us had begun quietly siding with my approach. I understood now that patience, careful observation, and ethical influence could dismantle arrogance far more effectively than confrontation. By maintaining calm and guiding the process, I was quietly building the foundation for the final family reckoning. Each volunteer, child, and neighbor was witnessing the difference between genuine competence and performative control. The slow, deliberate buildup of respect and acknowledgement was nearing its peak. I could feel the stage set for the ultimate moment when my quiet authority would be undeniable to every family member. The long game had brought me here, and every careful, ethical step I had taken had contributed to this inevitable shift. The family dynamic was almost entirely redefined, and the final chapters of this story were ready to unfold. During a small family gathering, my sister tried to undermine me again. She made subtle, sarcastic comments about my organizational abilities. I calmly presented facts, highlighting my contributions to a recent community project, showing results without belittling her. Family members nodded quietly, some whispering discreet approval. My sister's face twitched as her planned remarks fell flat. My husband's eyes met mine, offering a glance of silent admiration. My nephew followed my guidance without hesitation, absorbing the lesson in quiet authority. Each interaction slowly reinforced the power of patience and ethical influence. I realized the accumulation of respect over weeks had eroded my sister's assumed dominance more effectively than confrontation ever could. Each family member now recognized my calm competence and guidance, though she had not yet fully realized the magnitude of her own diminished influence. My subtle approach had gradually shifted attention and authority to me, allowing the family to see the contrast between genuine skill and loud arrogance. The quiet satisfaction of seeing the long-term plan unfold was immense. Every small acknowledgement, every whispered compliment, every glance of approval from my husband and observers reinforced my growing authority. The stage was nearly set for the final reckoning. I could feel the momentum building, knowing that the remaining chapters of this story would deliver the ultimate emotional payoff, the moment when respect and authority would be restored, and my sister would be forced to confront her own arrogance. The neighborhood picnic was sunny and bright, the smell of grilled food mixing with the grass and flowers. My sister immediately tried to control every activity, her voice piercing through the laughter of children. I calmly organized a small game, explaining the rules clearly to participants while my nephew followed silently. Parents and neighbors observed, whispering admiration at my composed authority. My sister's forced smile trembled, irritation creeping into her expressions. Every step I took, every calm instruction I gave, highlighted the difference between her performative arrogance and my steady guidance. My husband noticed too, his approving nod subtle but meaningful. Volunteers and children followed my lead without hesitation. Each small success quietly shifted perception, eroding her assumed superiority. By the end of the picnic, observers were clearly aware of the change. My sister tried to interject, but her words were drowned by my actions. The balance of authority had shifted, though she still struggled to accept it. I felt the long game coming to a close. Every calculated move, every ethical demonstration of competence, had built to this point. I could sense the final reckoning approaching. Soon, my quiet patience and careful strategy would culminate in undeniable acknowledgement. The family dynamic was nearly complete, and I was ready to claim the recognition I had long deserved. The climactic family dinner had arrived. The room was tense, every face expectant. My sister tried her usual arrogance, speaking over others, dismissing my suggestions, attempting to dominate conversation. I remained calm, measured, recounting past incidents of disregard and subtle humiliation with clarity and poise. Each story was precise, every detail underscoring her repeated arrogance. My husband's expression shifted, realization dawning as the contrast between my composed competence and her reckless behavior became undeniable. Family members whispered quietly, exchanging glances of acknowledgement. My nephew's eyes reflected admiration, understanding the lesson without a word. My sister faltered, attempts to defend herself collapsing under the weight of facts. Her forced smile disappeared entirely, leaving only frustration and shame. Each story I shared, every calm, ethical assertion of authority, chipped away at her assumed dominance. By the end of the dinner, the atmosphere had completely shifted. My sister and husband could no longer deny the recognition I had quietly earned. Patience, observation, and ethical influence had triumphed over arrogance. The long game had reached its peak, and I had secured not just respect but undeniable authority. The room was filled with subtle acknowledgement of the balance restored, leaving my sister humbled and my nephew inspired. The first part of the final reckoning was complete, setting the stage for full resolution. After the dinner, a quiet family meeting unfolded in the living room. I explained the mismanaged events, subtle dismissals, and patterns of arrogance with calm precision. Each detail highlighted the contrast between my careful planning and my sister's performative behavior. Family members nodded quietly, connecting past mistakes with current recognition. My sister's confidence crumbled as the reality became unavoidable. Even my husband, usually quiet, acknowledged the difference openly. My nephew, sitting beside me, reflected the lessons learned. Patience, competence, and ethical influence commanded respect far more effectively than loud arrogance. Observers whispered, confirming the shift in perception. My sister tried to interject, but each attempt fell flat, drowned by the clarity of my calm authority. Every carefully executed step I had taken over weeks had positioned me perfectly for this moment. The long game of subtle influence, observation, and ethical demonstration of skill had worked. By the meeting's end, the family dynamic had completely shifted. My sister and husband were humbled, acknowledgement quietly but undeniably given. I felt the immense satisfaction of a plan executed flawlessly, patience rewarded, and authority restored. The final chapter of confrontation had nearly concluded, leaving only the ultimate emotional payoff to deliver complete closure. Finally, I stood at the head of the family table, calm and composed. My sister and husband, humbled but unscathed, could not deny the respect I had earned. My nephew beamed, proud of the lessons absorbed through patience and guidance. The weeks of quiet observation, ethical influence, and subtle victories had culminated in this moment of undeniable authority. Every minor acknowledgement, every whispered compliment, every nod of approval over the past weeks had led to this final triumph. I had never raised my voice or acted unfairly, yet my competence and patience had restored balance. My sister and husband silently admitted their errors, respect now flowing toward me. The family dynamic was permanently altered, favoring merit, ethical guidance, and calm authority. My nephew understood the lesson in action. True respect is earned, not assumed. The long game had succeeded, and the ultimate emotional payoff, humbled arrogance, restored authority, and pride in ethical victory, was complete. The room reflected subtle awe, quiet admiration, and satisfaction. I felt a wave of accomplishment unlike anything before, knowing the careful, measured approach had led to undeniable recognition. My journey from humiliation to triumph concluded with satisfaction, respect, and quiet empowerment, leaving my sister humbled, my husband admiring, and my nephew inspired.